So if you're going to here a little bit early and just get things ready to go. We'll be doing a presentation today on how to read the avalanche forecast, and this is part of Mammut's Avalanche Safety Week. Like I said, we'll get started in about 2 minutes, so hang out, get yourself some water, something to eat or drink, a snack, and be ready for hopefully an exciting talk. I'm a little biased. All right, it's 11 o'clock, and like I said a minute ago, this is part of Mammut's Avalanche Safety Week. I'm Andy Anderson. I'm an avalanche forecaster at the Sierra Avalanche Center in the Lake Tahoe area in California and Nevada, and I'm an ambassador for Mammut as well. Today, our talk is going to be about how to read an avalanche forecast. There's lots of resources online for this as well. And taking a level 1 avalanche class will get you a lot more information on top of learning how to read the avalanche forecast. It'll teach you how to use that as well. And but today is going to be a little bit of a teaser and sort of explain, how we can look at an avalanche forecast and what the information that we can get out of it is. Most of the avalanche forecasts in the United States and Canada and even Europe and New Zealand are similar these days and have similar elements. So this will be applicable for many different avalanche centers across the country and in Canada and some of the other centers around the world. Again, so my name is Andy Anderson, and I'm an avalanche forecaster at the Sierra Avalanche Center in the Lake Tahoe area. This live stream will be recorded and available after this. There also is a chat window where you guys can ask questions, and I'll get to those and answer them as we go through. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen and do a bit of a presentation. All right, so here we go. There we go. How to read the avalanche forecast. The avalanche forecast is a great tool, and it provides a ton of information for us to use in the backcountry. I think it's a very useful piece of information and a very useful tool that can help us make better decisions, but I'm a little biased because I get to write these things. The forecast, it's designed to help you make decisions in the backcountry. It is not designed to make decisions for you. You've got to know a few things to be able to use the avalanche forecast well. You've got to know some of the terminology that we use, and you've got to know how to recognize and apply certain information. The avalanche forecast is a regional product, and so it applies to a region of space, not specifically the slope you're traveling on. It's not going to tell you whether or not that specific slope is going to avalanche today or not. It's going to tell you the likelihood and kinds of avalanches that you might encounter in the region that you're traveling. So you've got to make continuous assessments as you travel. The avalanche forecast is a starting point. It's a place where you can start your day and get a bunch of information and use that information as you travel, combine it with your own assessments and observations to get a better picture of what's going on. So it's a good starting point, but it doesn't replace you making good decisions in the backcountry. It just helps you by giving you more information to make better decisions. So what are those things that we really need to understand to use an avalanche forecast? These are all things that if you take a level 1 avalanche class, you will learn a ton of stuff about these things, and you'll become very, very good at knowing what these different things are and how to measure them and so forth and so on. The first one is the aspect. So a lot of avalanche forecasts talk about aspect and which aspects have which avalanche problems and things like that. Aspect is simply the direction that a slope faces. If I'm standing on a slope and looking that direction, if I'm standing on this slope and I'm looking north, then this slope has a north facing aspect. And so we use aspect to locate avalanche problems within terrain. And so it's really important to be able to know what aspect is and also know how to measure aspect. To pull out your compass and look at it and say, oh, I'm on a north facing aspect. That means the avalanche forecast said that this kind of problem was on north facing aspects, so I should be looking out for that. The second thing that we need to understand is slope angle. Avalanche forecasts often talk about slope angles and steep slopes and less steep slopes and things like that. Avalanches have to have a certain amount of slope to slide. Snow doesn't just slide off a flat surface. Most of the time when the slope is less than 30 degrees, it's not really steep enough for most avalanches. There are a few exceptions to that. And usually if you're in one of those exception times, the avalanche forecast will tell you that. Most avalanches occur between 30 and 45 degrees, which happens to also be the pretty fun recreating terrain as well. Another thing we need to understand is the elevation bands. We use slope, aspect, and elevation to sort of talk about the kinds of terrain that avalanches are going to happen in the avalanche forecasts. A lot of avalanche centers will use numbers for elevation bands. Some avalanche centers will use tree line as elevation bands, but in general, they're all the same. What we're getting at is usually the higher you go in the terrain, the more open and exposed the slopes are. And as you get into lower elevations, the more sheltered slopes are. So when we talk about, I'm going to use the near and above tree line delimiters. So above tree line, near tree line, and below tree line are going to be the three delimiters that we use for our elevation bands, at least here at the Sierra Avalanche Center. Like I said, other avalanche centers will use actual numbers, but we're all getting at the same thing. And that's the type of terrain that exists in those elevation bands. For us, near and above tree line terrain is terrain that's more open, it's more exposed to the elements, it's more exposed to the wind, it's more exposed to the sun. It typically gets more snow because it's higher elevation. And so typically the avalanche slopes in that terrain are bigger and more exposed and can produce larger avalanches, which can be problematic. On the flip side, they also tend to have less things to run into in terms of trees. So you got that going for you, I guess. They also tend to be slopes that people like to recreate in. So when we talk about those near and above tree line slopes, they are the slopes that have those characteristics of being more open and exposed and higher elevation. This is an example of some near tree line slope that's near a ridge. It's exposed to a lot of wind loading. You can see some trees, but they're not really protecting that slope. The slope is more open and can develop larger, more connected avalanche paths. This is definitely some above tree line terrain. As you can see, it's that same large open terrain with not much blocking any of the elements from it. It's really exposed to sun, wind, snow, etc. And thus it ends up with much larger, more connected avalanche paths as well. This would classify as near tree line terrain. Again, it's not quite that above tree line where there's no trees and there's nothing there, but these trees are pretty sparse, and this has more characteristics of more of an open slope, more larger open terrain than, say, some of the terrain in the lower portion of this photo, which is definitely more below tree line terrain. Speaking of below tree line terrain, that's the terrain that's more sheltered. It's less exposed. It also tends to be lower elevation and get less snow. The avalanche paths in below tree line terrain are typically smaller, but they tend to have lots of things to run into, aka trees. So they may produce smaller avalanches, but you may end up hitting a lot more stuff, or you may encounter you can certainly still encounter terrain traps in any of these elevation bands. But the consequences in avalanche and below tree line terrain can be just as dire as consequences in above tree line terrain. The main difference is that it's typically less exposed to wind. It typically gets less snow because it's lower elevation, and so those are some of the characteristics. It's typically smaller, more pockets of terrain than the bigger, more open terrain above tree line. Again, this is an example of some below tree line terrain. You can see a small avalanche in there that runs straight into some big trees. So these things, this is how we talk about locating avalanche problems in the forecast. We talk about where they are in an elevation band. We talk about the aspect that they may be on, and we will often talk about the kinds of slopes that they'll occur on. So understanding those pieces of terrain terminology is really important for understanding the avalanche forecast. Another piece that's pretty darn important for understanding the avalanche forecast is the avalanche danger scale. The North American Public Avalanche Danger Scale is used in Canada and the US. It has 5 danger ratings: low, moderate, considerable, high, and extreme. And these danger ratings, each company have different definitions to them. It is not a linear scale. As the avalanche danger increases, the likelihood of encountering an avalanche increases exponentially rather than in a straight line. If we look at low, for instance, our travel advice in low is that it's generally safe avalanche conditions, and we should watch for unstable snow on isolated terrain features. Natural and human triggered avalanches are unlikely. So then we take up one step up to moderate, and all of a sudden it says heightened avalanche conditions on specific terrain features. Evaluate snow and terrain carefully. Identify features of concern. That's not a linear jump. That's a bigger step than just going straight up line. Natural and human triggered avalanches, or natural avalanches, are unlikely, and human triggered avalanches are possible at moderate danger. So once we step into that second level of danger, human triggered avalanches become possible. I'm sure if I told everybody who was watching this video that, well, you can come watch this video about how to read the avalanche forecast, but if you do, it's possible that your computer will explode in your face. You'd probably be like, well, maybe I'll read a book about how to read the avalanche forecast, or go take a class instead of watching the video. Obviously, our desire to go recreate in good snow may be stronger than our desire to watch an online video about how to read the avalanche forecast. So go figure. But moral of the story is that at the second level of the North American Avalanche Danger Scale, we start seeing human-triggered avalanches becoming possible. Once we get to the third level, human-triggered avalanches are likely, and we have dangerous avalanche conditions where careful snowpack evaluation, cautious route finding, and conservative decision-making are essential. Moderate and considerable, these two dangers, so yellow and orange, moderate and considerable, are the danger ratings at which most avalanche fatalities occur. And part of that is that they're some of the harder ones to evaluate because you aren't seeing the completely obvious clues like you would at higher extreme, where you're seeing avalanches everywhere and it's really obvious. And partly it's because those are the days when lots of people are out, when these moderate and considerable days. So those are the times when you really need to be on your game and really be conscious of making good observations and paying attention to what's going on around you and getting the picture of what's going on so that you can make good decisions. The forecast is going to help you get an idea of what to look for, but it can't make decisions for you. So you'll see there's a lot of different words on this page, but the main piece of the avalanche danger scale is the travel advice. And that's what we as forecasters fall back on when we're trying to decide what the danger rating is for a given day. If we're thinking that it's the advice that we would want to give to a friend to go out, and if they were going out on that day. If I was like, one of my friends called up in the morning and was like, hey, Andy, what do you think? What's it like out there today? if I could just give them one sentence of advice, it might be like, oh man, it's extreme out there today. I would avoid all avalanche terrain. Or, well, there's some interesting things going out there, and I'd say the avalanche danger is moderate. It's heightened avalanche conditions on some specific terrain features. You should evaluate snow and terrain carefully and identify where those features of concern are. So that travel advice is what we fall back on to when we're if we're waffling between a danger rating for the day. So really understanding this danger scale is key to understanding the avalanche forecast. And if you can understand these 4 things, the danger scale, some terrain terminology in terms of slope, elevation bands, and aspect, then you can start to read the avalanche forecast. There's a little bit more that we'll go into as we read through the avalanche forecast in terms of avalanche problems. But let's go ahead and figure out where we can get these things. So the avalanche forecasts are pretty darn easy to get. You can get all the North American avalanche forecasts at either avalanche.org in the United States or at avalanche.ca in Canada, or on the Avalanche Forecast app. It gets both Canada and North America into one app, and it's just a way to view the avalanche forecast. So all 3 of these methods work great. You can pull it up on your phone. You can pull them off the internet. On your computer, your iPad, your tablet, whatever. And a lot of avalanche centers also have a phone line that you may call. And you'll go to the local avalanche center's website to get those phone numbers. Once you get the avalanche forecast, you'll pull it up. And this is a screenshot of one from last year, but I'm going to click on it and it's going to take us to the Avalanche Center page. I'm going to use avalanche.org because I'm going to go to the Sierra Avalanche Center where I am. All these things will geolocate you if you allow it to. And there I am here near Truckee, California. As you can see, there's not much going on right now, although we did just get about 8 inches of snow, which is pretty darn exciting. But we're going to click here for more information. If the avalanche forecast is out, then it'll take us to the avalanche forecast. For now, it takes us to a general avalanche information page since we haven't actually started forecasting yet. But on this page, we'll start talking about what's going on and how the snowpack's starting to build up here in the early season before we actually start issuing avalanche forecasts. And most avalanche centers do this as well. This has some of the elements of an avalanche forecast in terms of a bottom line where we talk about what you can expect in a very succinct manner. So it's, what kind of avalanche problems are there? Where are they in the terrain? And what should you do about them? And then it'll often have like a forecast discussion and a weather forecast and some observations. So this general avalanche information is not an avalanche forecast. It doesn't have a danger rating and all that, but it can get you started. Once we get further into the season, we'll start issuing daily avalanche forecasts. And those look like this. Like I said, this is one from last year, but we're going to use it in terms of going through to talk about how to read the forecast. So you can see it's got some things in common with that general avalanche information. It's still got a bottom line. It's still got the time and date that it was issued, when it expires. Both of those are really important. We also, once it does expire, we put this big red banner up here that says, hey, the forecast is not current anymore, so that people aren't using an old forecast as they go out. So that's the first thing to check is like, oh, I'm in the right region. Oh yeah, I wanted to look at the Central Sierra Nevada. It was issued on Thursday, December 16th at 7 a.m. It expires 24 hours later, and it'll usually tell you who wrote it. This one I wrote. Once we get past that initial header information, we get to the bottom line. And the bottom line, like I said, tells you what kind of problem that is for today, where you might encounter it, and what you should do about it. So we try to keep this to be pretty simple and straightforward. On this one, we can say, we see that in this case, we have new snow and wind are continuing to add weight to a snowpack with weak buried snow feet below the surface. Oh, that sounds bad. This has created a complex and dangerous avalanche conditions in the mountains. People recreating on steep slopes, in sheltered areas, or in areas where wind-blowing snow piles up would likely trigger larger consequential avalanches today. So we know that there is weight on top of weak snow, and that steep slopes in both sheltered areas and wind-blown areas are places where we're likely to trigger consequential avalanches. And then again, what should we do about that? Cautious route finding that uses low angle terrain that is not close to steeper terrain could provide a larger safety margin. So if we want to try and avoid this complex and dangerous avalanche conditions, we should use cautious route finding in lower angle terrain that is not close to other steeper terrain. So that's our bottom line. And that gives us just the quick snippet. It's a sound bite. It's 3 sentences, just trying to give you the quick summary that you can take with you. If you want more information, and many people do, there is lots more information as you scroll down. As we go down the page, the information gets more detailed and more nuanced. So the next section, we see the avalanche danger broken out by elevation. Here we have above tree line considerable, near tree line is considerable, below tree line is considerable, and we have what we expect the avalanche danger to be for the next day. In this case, all the danger ratings are the same at all elevations, but sometimes you may see, considerable, moderate, moderate, or something like that, where the danger ratings vary by elevation bands. We can also see these tabs up here, and I'll come back to those in a second. Once we get below the danger rating, getting broken out into elevations, we start to see the avalanche problems. And avalanche problems are ways to categorize different kinds of avalanches. In this case, today we had 2 problems. The first one was a wind slab, and it was located in northwest, north, northeast, east, and southeast facing slopes in near tree line and above tree line terrain. You're likely to trigger a wind slab if you go into that terrain where they exist. And those wind slabs are between large and very large. So they could bury or injure a person or bury a car or something like that. So that section right here, where we see the avalanche problem, is our quick description with icons of what kind of avalanches you might expect, what the kind of avalanche you might expect for the day is, where it is, how likely it is, and how large it is. Below that, in this problem section, we'll have a discussion on that goes more in depth into that particular problem, describing where it is specifically, how it's built, and how you can recognize it and how you can avoid it. Along with that, we'll often add some media to further describe these avalanche problems. In this case, we also have a second avalanche problem today of persistent slabs, and these are located on northwest through north, through northeast, through southeast aspects at all elevations. You're likely to trigger them, and they are between large and very large in size. And again, we have this nice description with lots of details about that specific avalanche problem with some images to go with it. Near the bottom of the forecast, we have a media section, which will show several different images that can illustrate what's going on in the forecast, and a weather forecast with a small discussion and the weather forecast for the next 24 hours. So this one also has, sensor data from the past 24 hours, and then right here, and then the weather forecast for today, the weather forecast for tomorrow, and the weather forecast, tonight, and the weather forecast for tomorrow. And avalanche centers typically work with their local weather service professionals to create these forecasts. Great. Some other avalanche forecasts will also have a forecast discussion section that may or may not be in there that goes into more detail about whatever the forecaster thinks is important for that day. It could be more detail about the unusual weather pattern or an unusual avalanche cycle or things like that. And that avalanche forecast discussion will look something like this, which we can see on our general avalanche information page right now, but not on this old forecast page. Great. So that's the avalanche forecast. And like I said, it starts with simple information and progresses through to more complex, more detailed information as you go down. You can go into these tabs and see even more information. Here we have weather forecast as a tab, and then here we have our observations. And this will be, basically raw data, some of the raw data that we're using to produce the avalanche forecast. Right now, these observations will have, images and descriptions and snow pits and things like that. And you can click on them and get taken to the full observations page. To see more information about that sort of thing. Great. So here we have our avalanche forecast and how we read it. There's a few other things on Avalanche Center websites that are often very useful in terms of making plans and decisions. In addition to the avalanche forecast, I already mentioned the observations. You can often find it here within the forecast, or there'll be a link somewhere on the Avalanche Center's website to go to observations. And we can click over to that and you can see these are the ones from this year, which started yesterday. But there'll be a whole table of observations. If we look at like last year's observations, you can see all the information. And, if there's this area that you think you're going to, there's probably some data from it in recent days, at least in our area. And that's true for a lot of avalanche centers. I'll go over here. We can look at observations on the map. We can look at observations as a table. And again, this is another piece of information to go along with the avalanche forecast that can help you make decisions. Here's our map, looking at various observations around the area. In addition to observations, there'll often be a weather section on Avalanche Center websites where you can look at remote weather station data and webcams. Oh, that one looks snowy and gray today. That's great. Or a variety of different things. So that's also a useful tool in making decisions as you go out. In addition to that, you can see education resources and weather forecasts and all kinds of things on Avalanche Center websites. They'll often see some forecast tutorials, like how to read the forecast and avalanche problems explained and things like that. So we'll go back to the forecast here and see if anyone has any questions so far. No questions, but that's all right. The other thing that I wanted to talk about before we go away is just a little bit more detail on these avalanche problems. Each one of these things, click to learn more. There's wherever you see a question mark, there's help on the page, things like that. But if we're thinking about these avalanche problems, most centers are using these avalanche problems: loose dry avalanches, loose wet avalanches, wind slabs, storm slabs, wet slabs, persistent deep slabs, cornices, and glide avalanches. These deep slab avalanches can be persistent or non-persistent, actually. So each of those problems is specific and warrants a different style of management. And grouping them into, or knowing what kind of avalanche problems you're going to face on a given day can really determine how you travel. Obviously, if there's the main problem is loose dry avalanches, that's very different than, say, deep slab avalanches that are going to break 5 feet down in the snowpack and across large pieces of rain. So knowing the avalanche problem can be super helpful. And And that's something that is beyond the scope of this talk to learn fully about. But if you take a level 1 Avalanche class or continue your Avalanche education in that way, those are great times to become really familiar with the Avalanche problems that your forecast center is using. And most forecast centers are using these problems. Some of them use a slightly different set. So. All right. So that's the Avalanche cast and a little tour of different Avalanche Center website resources. And that's what I've got for today. Does anyone have any questions? Great. So it looks like we don't have too many questions in here, and that's all right. But hopefully folks got to enjoy this and it gave you some useful information. There's a really great video on how to read the avalanche forecast on the National Avalanche Center website as well. And there's a great avalanche problems description video there and a danger scale description video as well. And we'll share those links out over the course of the week. Thanks.